If you were to give yourself a grade on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say your faith level is? 1 being very weak, 10 being very strong. Now, you're the only one that can fill that out. Last week we started with the question, where is God, or who is God? And we looked at God and found there were a lot of different passages in the Bible that talk about God and who He is. He said the Scriptures teach us that God is love, God is light, God is faithful and merciful. He's my rock and my salvation. There were all kinds of passages that reminded us about who He is and what He does for us in our lives. He fights for us. He goes up to bat for us. All in all, you'd have to say God's pretty awesome. And maybe though you've heard someone say, all right, well, you need to put your faith in God. And that's one of those phrases that can become a cliche. Oh yeah, put my faith in God. All right, well, what does that mean? Well, today I want to ask this question, what is faith? You know, it's interesting, I found in my life the times that maybe I've just felt kind of out of it or not where I needed to be spiritually, or things were just kind of in a funk, that I found that it's not necessarily studying the complicated things or all the intricate things of the faith that get me back. It's going back to the bedrock foundational things of who is God and what is faith that help me the most. So I want to challenge you today to start thinking about, okay, what is faith? If you had to give a definition, the Bible gives a good definition in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. It says, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Another translation says, and faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And you might hear that and think, well, what does that mean? There are some key words there. I like the positive, the certainty that faith is being sure, or the assurance of things hoped for. What are you hoping for in your life? What are you hoping for in eternity? Probably that we all spend eternity together in heaven. And the evidence of things not seen. How in the world can you have evidence of something that you cannot see? Well, the writer of Hebrews says that's faith. And it goes on in the next verse, and he says, now this is what the ancients were commended for. And he goes along in the rest of the chapter and gives us illustrations. I love stories. Everybody loves stories. And he figures that the best way for us to understand what faith is to hear some of the stories of people who had faith. And that's why Hebrews 11 is called the Hall of Fame chapter of faith in the Bible. So we're going to look at Hebrews chapter 11 today. I'm going to have some passages up on the screen, but if you want to look at your own Bible, because I'm going to be reading some other verses, it'd be good to do. We're actually going to start at the end of the chapter because he gives a summary there. And to sum up the chapter, you could say this: faith is believing that God has even better things in store for you. Listen to what he says in Hebrews 11:39. All of these people, that's all the ones that are in the chapter. All of these people we have mentioned received God's approval because of their faith. Yet none of them received all that God had promised. That's an interesting phrase. And then he goes on, he says, for God had far better things in mind for us, that we would also benefit them, for they can't receive the prize at the end of the race until we finish the race. That's an interesting phrase. It's one of those phrases as I was looking back over my sermon and saw there, I'm thinking, man, I should have spent more time on that phrase. What does he mean when it says, the things that we will have will benefit them and they won't receive it till the end of the race? That basically means until we're all together in glory in heaven, then will we begin to see everything that he has promised for us. But before we get there, faith is believing that God does have things in store for us, better things in store for us. There's people mentioned in this chapter that came to find that out. Abraham, in fact, a year ago today, we were starting the whole True North series, and we looked at Abraham. And God came to Abraham in Genesis 11 and said, Abraham, I got a deal for you. I'm going to give you a nation. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to give you a blessing for the whole world. And Abraham said, okay. And God said, now here's what you need to do. You need to leave where you're at. You need to leave your land. You need to take all your family and you take off. Well, where am I going? Well, you just go. You'll know when you get there. And he did. And he left the area of Babylon, which is now Iraq, and he went up over the Fertile Crescent, and he came down into what now is Israel, and to the Middle East there, and he became an occupant of the land. But he never did see all the promises God gave him. He never saw that land belonging to him. In fact, the only piece of property that Abraham owned in his lifetime in Genesis was the burial plot for his wife Sarah. Nothing else he ever owned. And yet God promised him the land. A nation. He didn't have any children. We remember that story? And God comes to him and says, well, you're going to be a father of a nation. And I can't even be the father of one kid. How can I be a father of a nation? And yet God blessed him eventually. But he didn't see that nation. And the blessing that was to come to the whole world, he didn't see that. What about Moses? He led the people up to the edge of the promised land. He had put up with a lot in 40 years, don't you think? He had gone through all kinds of stuff. And because of a lack of total faith, God told him to strike the rock and water would come out. And Moses struck it twice. And God said, that was a sign that you really didn't believe what I said. And Moses, you're only going to be able to see into the promised land. And he went up to the mountain there and he overlooked the promised land. And then he died. He did not quite yet receive what was promised him. But he still had faith. See, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's believing that God has something better in store for you than what you have right here. Now, my guess is a lot of you enjoy coming down to Florida in the winter time. All right? I don't know what makes me think that, but it just, I'll go out on a limb. Those of you in the Midwest, our daughter sent a picture yesterday from St. Louis, had, 8, 10, 12 inches of snow. And I said to Judy, man, wouldn't it be nice to be up there today? Said, well, I don't know. I wouldn't mind being there to watch it snow and come down. You go out play in the snow, and then you go in and get hot chocolate. And she says, well, I can make you some hot chocolate this afternoon. Not quite the same, all right? But we come down, and what do they call this? Paradise. Let me let you in on a secret. This is not quite paradise. Paradise does not have no-see-ums and mosquitoes. All right? Just a thought. But how would you like to live in a place where there's no more pain or no more tears or no more death or no more sorrow? How would you like to be a place that you'll not need the lights to give you light? You see, that's what Revelation 21 and 22 describes for us. How would you like not to have to pay the electricity bill? Or no need to buy gas in your car? Or no need to go to the mall because you'll have everything you need? And some of you just got, what? No mall? But the good news is there is fishing in heaven. I've got proof. Revelation 22 says there will be streams of living water. All right? And water, that must mean there's fish there. That's the only thing I can figure out. But all kidding aside, God does have something much better in store for us. All the great things that we enjoy here on this earth. And faith is believing that. This isn't all there is. There's much more waiting for us. The second thing we can learn from this chapter is faith is learning from those who've gone before us. Down in chapter 12, verse 1, he says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge clouds of witnesses to the life of faith, and he's getting ready to make a point, but let's just stop and dwell on that. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. If you go back and each week I hope to give you what I call a next level challenge. Here's something to go a little bit deeper. Follow along in the reading schedule. You'll find there in the bulletin, or you can find it in our app. And I've upgraded the app and our webpage so that all you have to do is click on the reference and it goes directly to the page, the scripture. So you don't have to go to a different app to open up. So you just click on it. Here's what I want you to do. As you go across chapter 11, you'll find that there are 16 different people mentioned. There are two groups of people, the children of Israel and the prophets. I challenge you to go back and read about, especially those people. When it talks about Abraham, go back to the book of Genesis and read Abraham's story. When it talks about Moses, go back to Exodus and read the story of Moses. And the story of Joseph, it's mentioned there. The story of Noah. Go back and read those into a next level to go a little bit deeper and to get a better understanding of what this means, what this faith meant to those who've gone before us. Because you look at some of those that are in this chapter. Noah, Hebrews 11:7 says this about Noah. It was by faith that Noah built an ark to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God who warned him about something that had never happened. What's he talking about? It's never happened there. It had never rained. And up to the days of Noah, it was simply the ground was watered by the dew that came up from the ground. But God comes to him and says, Noah, here's the deal. I want you to build this ark, this big boat. Now, Noah did not live on the seashore either, all right? I want you to build this ark, and here's the deal. You're going to need it someday. It's going to flood. The entire earth's going to be covered. And Noah says, you got to be kidding, God. I got better things to do. No. He says, okay. And for 120 years, he built that ark. And he received a lot of encouragement from all of his buddies, right? No, what in the world are you doing? You've gone crazy. How are you going to float that thing? How are you going to get it to the ocean? You must have an awful big truck and trailer to get that thing where it needs to go. And he was ridiculed and he was put down, and yet he remained faithful. From Noah, we can learn that faith endures the test of time. 120 years? We can't wait 20 minutes for something. 120 years. Abraham. I'm sure Abraham had some questions. Chapter 11, verse 8 says this about him. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God had promised, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in a tent. Think Abraham had any questions along the way? God, where are we going? Why am I doing this? God tells him he's going to have a son. What do you mean I'm going to have a son? And then he has the son, and several years later he says, Abraham, I want you to take that son. I want you to go up to the mountains. I want you to offer him as a sacrifice to me. Genesis doesn't record the questions that Abraham has, but I can't help but think that he was human. He had to have some things go through his mind. But he stayed the course. Hebrews says all of this was credited to him as righteousness. And from Abraham we can learn that faith works through the questions that are bound to arise in our journey with God. Learning. Joseph in the Old Testament. What an amazing story that is. But there's a reference in Hebrews 11 that I bet you don't usually think of Joseph when it comes to faith. Verse 22, and it says, and it was by faith that Joseph, when he was about to die, confidently spoke of God's bringing the people of Israel out of Egypt. He was so sure of it that he commanded them to carry his bones with them when they left. What do you know about the story of Joseph? Well, you know the story of the coat of many colors and how his brothers didn't like him and they threw him into the pit, sold him to those guys. He went down to Egypt, worked in Potiphar's house, but then got thrown into jail unjustly. But he came out of that and was recognized, and he became the leader of over the crops of Egypt, and he saved the entire Egyptian nation from the famine. And we know all those stories. Why in the world aren't those things mentioned? Did you catch what's mentioned about the faith of Joseph? It says when he was about to die, he said to the people there, I want you to take my bones with you when you get out of Egypt and bury them in my homeland. Why in the world would that be such a big deal? And why did that show faith? Because it didn't happen the week after he died. It didn't happen 10 years after. Over 400 years. And if you read the story, there's a note in there that says, and they took the bones of Joseph with them. And the writer of Hebrews says, you talk about faith. Here's a man that was able to say, sometime my people are going to go back home. Make sure you take me with you. Faith. We look at people's lives and we look at what we can learn from them. Have you ever learned anything from anyone else in your life? A grandparent, a parent, a friend? Yeah, we can learn from them. And let me give you this challenge. Hebrews says, and from those who've gone before us, you know what? You're going before someone else. Do you have faith that your children or your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren can look to and say, that's where I learned about faith? Faith is learning from those who've gone before you. I'll add, and it's teaching those who follow you. Faith is getting rid of some things that are holding you back. I want to show you a video clip here.
The World 100-meter final.
Set.
They get away first time. Tyson Gay right alongside Usain Bolt, but here he goes, streaking away already. It's Bolt all the way. He's looking round at Gay. Watch the clock. It's goal for Bolt, and again he's done it again. A new world record for Usain Bolt. They say lightning doesn't strike twice.
Here's a bold statement. I bet I could beat Usain Bolt in a race. I've got it all figured out. There's only one condition. We line up a race, and he has to wear the suit that the men who landed on the moon wore when they jumped out of the lunar thing. He'll have the same muscles, same body structure, same distance, everything. Except there's probably going to he may get held back a little more. That may be my only chance. Listen to what Hebrews 12:1, the middle of the verse says. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily hinders our progress. If Usain Bolt would strip everything down from that suit, I wouldn't stand a chance. Because that suit is what was holding him back. What's holding you back? What is it that you need to strip from your life? What is it that you need to get rid of that's holding you back from going to the next level in your faith, your next level of walk with God? What is it? The writer of Hebrews says, and get rid of the sin that so easily entangles. There's all kinds, we could spend the rest of the day listing sins. There's sins of the flesh and of the mind and the heart. Same thing. Whatever that might be in your life, I know, and basically bottom line is if we're ever going to go to the next level, wherever we're at in our walk of faith, there may be some things that we need to strip off so that we're not bogged down with all the stuff that hinders us. So faith sometimes is getting rid of the things that are holding you back from the next level. One final thought. The last half of verse 1 and the first part of verse 2 in chapter 12. Faith is living life with purpose. This is what he says. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, on whom our faith depends from finish to start, from start to finish. I don't need to tell you this. Life is an endurance race, not a 50-yard dash. And there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of things that come along the way. And in order for us to go through the end, we need we need to live life on purpose. We need to live life on purpose. Purpose makes all the difference, doesn't it? If you have the right reason, the right motivation to do something, then it's in some ways not always easier, but it gives you the oomph that it takes to do it. Just recently, the first weekend in December, I decided I wanted to spend the weekend in the hospital. Okay? Had an attack of pancreatitis. Never had anything like that before. And they didn't find anything, did an MRI, said everything's clear. We can't really see why that happened or what happened. But why don't you go on a low-fat diet, and that'll keep you from having another one. And 2 or 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years prior to that, I would always say, I really need to lose 15 pounds. And I'd look in the mirror and said, not today. It's not going to happen. You know what? Lo and behold, a new motivation came along and said, if you don't do this, you're going to continue to have problems. So, to date, I've lost about 13 pounds. And, I'm eating with purpose, other than just pleasure. You ever notice we eat for entertainment? Think about it. You really do. You eat for pleasure. I'm not saying that just I'm just saying that. What's your purpose? What's your purpose? Your author and perfecter of faith. He said, run with endurance the race that God set out for you. That means life is not always easy as a Christian. Life is not always a bed of roses. But run with endurance. And how do you do that? By keeping your eyes on Jesus. There's that hymn that maybe you've heard or sang, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face. And the things on earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. What's your purpose? What are you focusing on? How are you doing in this race called life? I'll close with this thought. In April of 1988, the Evening News reported on a photographer who was a skydiver. And he wanted to jump from the plane with a bunch of other skydivers. And he wanted to film them as they were going down, the formations they did and all that stuff. So they went up to the plane and they got up there and they showed this film on the news that showed all these great things the skydivers were doing. And then all of a sudden, the camera just went berserk. And what they reported on was that the skydiver, the photographer, had went back and reached for his ripcord only to find that he had forgotten to put on his parachute. And tragically fell to his death. Nothing could save him because he had forgotten the most important thing. I want to ask you a sobering question. I don't mean this just to tug at our emotions, but it's a question we have to ask. What are you placing your faith in to save you? Is it something that when you grab at it, you're going to find out it's really not anything that could do anything to save you? Because faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Let's go to the next level, whatever that might be for you in your walk with God. Let's pray.